In the late 80s, the concept of UFOs was not nearly as widely accepted as it is today, and most of our knowledge on the topic was reserved for cheesy sci-fi films which only further fictionalized the topic of extraterrestrial alien presence on Earth. That is, until 1989, when a physicist by the name of Bob Lazar shocked the world with his revelation that he worked on back engineering crafts in an Area 51 site now famously termed S4. To many, the lack of science-minded whistleblowers up to that point seemed almost like a form of evidence that back engineering crafts was just another myth in a myriad of topics associated with aliens and UFOs. Which is why Bob's testimony was so revolutionary for furthering the pursuit of truth on this topic. But was Bob Lazar really telling the truth? And can we prove the existence of underground installations in Area 51 just as Bob Lazar had mentioned? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome, beautiful people, to Second Earth Alternative. This is your host, Felipe Osorio. So where do we start? Oh yeah, Area 51. What used to be America's Cinderella secret base. Area 51 was constructed sometime around January 1951, just 3.5 years after the Roswell crash. However, according to some publications like Popular Mechanics, the beginning of Area 51 is directly related to the development of the U-2 reconnaissance aircraft just after World War II. That may well be true, but according to American historian, the contradictions surrounding the events of Roswell, New Mexico gave rise to countless conspiracy theories that linked the Roswell UFO incident with Area 51 U.S. military base in the Nevada desert. So was the base created for exotic secret projects like containment of Roswell remains, or was it a product of the need to secure aviation technologies for events like the Korean War, which America had just entered? Now, it's hard to determine for certain given the top secret nature of the site, not to mention it could have been used for a combination of the aforementioned possibilities. However, if you're to believe what Bob Lazar has to say, a physicist who claimed he actually worked there, well, his exact job was to help back engineer alien crafts.
How you got involved with this program?
I had sent resumes to several national labs around the country. I got a response from a couple of them. They said, we might have something in the near future you would be very interested in. You know, you say you work on little projects. I said, yeah, I have a particle accelerator in my master bedroom. And
now, why should we believe Bob Lazar, a man whose MIT records was seemingly erased, a man whose only evidence for having worked anywhere near a science lab was his name listed on a phone book in Los Alamos, which many took it to mean that he might actually be a janitor?
I was never more certain of how far away I was from my goal than when I was standing right beside it.
The point is, evidence suggests some man by the name of Bob Lazar may have worked at some capacity at Los Alamos, which, due to it being an energy and nuclear testing lab, has the potential to farm prospective workers for other declassified projects. Not to mention that I later discovered, watching a video with security interacting with individuals that were attempting to get close to Area 51, that the security associated with Area 51 might actually be contracted by the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration, despite the New York Daily News commenting that the spokesperson for the Department of Defense would not comment or confirm the contractor who employs the security guards. Now take a look at what facilities happen to be owned by NNSA. Interesting. Now, Bob Lazar has mostly remained silent on the subject, well, at least until recently, where after 30 years of waiting and not hardly holding any camera interviews, he is now finally willing to speak on the subject. But why now? After 3 decades of few to no interviews, does Bob finally decide to speak again on what was nearly unspeakable at the time? Well, I think film producer Jeremy Kerbel does a fantastic job of explaining this.
So, John Lear is intimately connected to the Bob Lazar story. And the reason he's intimately connected to the Bob Lazar story is because I've talked with a lot of people that knew Bob Lazar before he became public, before he even worked, allegedly, in the program. And man, he would say things like, oh, I feel bad for John. You know, it comes from a prominent family, the Lear jet family, and he believes in UFOs. He felt bad for him. So that was like Bob's standpoint on UFOs way before he ever found himself in the situation that he says he did. You could tell from the news reports that George did. George dug deep. And that time period was so bizarre for the people that lived it. They were followed by people. George had 6 other witnesses that were coming off of the base to corroborate Bob Lazar's story or parts of Bob Lazar's story. All 6 of them declined to ever talk with him again after they were paid a visit and told that they would be harmed. And we're talking about George Knapp here. We're talking about people that do talk to him. And the stories of these people that couldn't tell their story to him afterwards, it's pretty incredible. But other people have come forward, and things have come to light over the last 30 years. George made a point. You gotta talk with Bob, and you gotta tell this story, and you gotta do it yourself to really get to the bottom of it. He's like, but you gotta be the luckiest guy on the planet for that to happen. And he kind of explains that to me here.
You have to cover the story of Bob Lazar, and the only way to do that is to talk to Bob. And I don't know if he'll talk to you or not, but you need to try. Well, it's all going to be circumstance for you. Is the moment that you approach him, the mood that he's in, what else is going on in his life at the time. You might hit the jackpot and get him at exactly the right time, and the universe is aligned and he's willing to talk about it. But you'd have to be awfully lucky, because in general, Bob doesn't like to talk about it. I think he's very happy in his life. He's happy to have left the UFO stuff behind. He misses his friends. He misses John Lear. He misses Gene Huff, maybe even me to some extent. But he doesn't miss the UFO topic, and he doesn't miss talking about it, because ultimately it's disturbing. These are disturbing issues. They go to the heart of who we are as people, as human beings, the nature of reality itself. Is this a computer simulation? Are we all the product of an alien video game or some multi-dimensional movie, drive-in movie theater production or something? Big questions, disturbing answers, and Bob has never been comfortable in talking about them, never.
Now, it wasn't until 2001 that I first read Bob Lazar's interview transcript with then crime investigator George Knapp. Now, I have to say, I was absolutely mesmerized by the interview. I just couldn't believe how a man could be so detailed and thorough with his commentary in what was an unprecedented and potentially crazy claim. What really hit me, though, was Bob's mannerisms, which kind of reminded me of my father, who also happened to be a theoretical physicist. Now, as a kid, I had some basic groundings on the topic of physics, but being aware of how UFOs behaved, I had to admit I never could wrap my head around as to how these UFOs could actually maneuver. How did they come to Earth so easily or quickly? Surely they had to be violating the speed of light to do so. Now, these questions had lingered in my mind for a long time, that is until I read Bob Lazar's transcript. It finally became clear that what Bob Lazar explained in a way circumvented the issue of space-time travel without necessarily violating the speed of light. The concept is not to ride the spatial dimensions of space-time itself, but rather expand space around oneself, then allow the space to contract back into its natural formation, which would allow greater distances to be attained with less actual travel in the space-time fabric itself. In fact, this concept was so revolutionary, it wasn't until the last few years that NASA finally caught on to the concept of bending space around the craft itself. Now, for all the Trekkies out there, I know Star Trek might have gotten it right, but let's be honest, what didn't they get right? And to be frank, Star Trek never really did explain the science behind the warp drive. But of all the evidence I have reviewed, what really caught my attention was this idea that skeptics often say that the reason why they don't believe in UFOs is that you can't scientifically verify it, since it's not a phenomenon that is repeatable. In the following segment, I would like to review the top 5 reasons why I personally think Bob Lazar is telling the truth. Of all the UFO sightings I have ever heard of, Bob Lazar may be the only one to ever actually produce not just video evidence, but one that is repeatable. Wait, what? Yeah, you heard it. Bob Lazar was able to predict the exact location and time of a UFO-like craft in Area 51, not to mention that he videotaped it with witnesses, one a former CIA pilot, John Lear. Not once, but twice.
Flights of something that looks like a flying saucer over Papoose Lake.
That happened 3 weeks in a row. They took people out there. I've interviewed all the witnesses who were there, and they've got it on videotape. How did he know?
Bob Lazar may be the only person to date to be able to reliably reproduce proof of his claims by predicting the exact time and location of a test craft flying with the same physics we often associate with extraterrestrial crafts. Bob Lazar passed a lie detector test. Though a polygraph exam isn't foolproof in and of itself, it is, however, difficult to beat without proper training. Though it may be deemed only circumstantial evidence, it nonetheless supports his claims. Now, Bob Lazar made scientifically accurate predictions that were not really obvious to the scientific community at the time. In describing the physics of the craft, Bob Lazar made very clear that the fuel, the energy source of the craft, is a yet-to-be-discovered element called element 115.
What is element 115? Is it found here on Earth, or is it strictly an extraterrestrial material?
115 is strictly an extraterrestrial material. It probably occurs naturally in some other places, maybe other star systems. Some people not familiar with science or chemistry say, well, that's ridiculous. All the elements occur on Earth, but that's not true. And there are elements on the periodic chart that aren't found on Earth. I believe the Heavy Ion Research Lab in Darmstadt, Germany, has reached element 112 recently. So 115 isn't that far away. And when they synthesize it, it's not like they're making a couple ounces of it. They're talking about 1 or 2 atoms of it. To make any usable quantity of a heavy element like that is virtually impossible. The reactor also sets up a gravitational wave from the 115 being bombarded. This gravitational wave is present at the top of the reactor and is essentially guided in the same way microwaves are guided, through tuned tubes. And this goes to their amplifying cavities and through the projectors that are in the bottom of the craft.
Of the few possible isotope ratios that have been attempted, the element remains highly unstable. However, upon examining a physics forum, I was surprised to see that there was a thread on the theoretical gravitational limitations of elements. Yep, you guessed it. 115 was the atomic number that the creator of the post believed to be the theoretical limit for creating a stable isotope. And no, he did not mention Bob Lazar in the thread. Now, aside from that, there's also the concept of how we travel through space, which Bob Lazar's description, as was mentioned earlier, seems to be in sync with the new theoretical models for potential future space travel. Bob Lazar has never changed his story since his first revelation in 1989. That's over 3 decades.
Other people have come forward, and things have come to light over the last 30 years.
Not to mention the unbelievable claim that there are underground installations in the surrounding Papoose Lake, a dry lakebed 50 miles south of Area 51. After the initial few interviews, Bob Lazar didn't talk much on the subject, and there was no New York bestseller to accompany his story. Frankly, what became obvious to those who knew him best was that his newfound infamy with the UFO topic and Area 51 was everything Bob wished he didn't have in life.
You can only really see it from personal perspective, how it has negatively influenced his life, what he's been through because of telling this story, which supposedly in a lot of people's mind isn't real. Yet there have been some real-world consequences.
In other words, there was little to gain. There simply wasn't any obvious motive for making up a fantastical story, to say the least. So having said that, I wanted to quickly visit the alleged location of where Bob Lazar claimed to work on back engineering the alien crafts. And similarly, I wanted to show you what else may be lurking under the mountains of Area 51. So let's take a look.